Welcome back to the Explainer, everyone. Okay, today we are unpacking a concept that literally transforms how we think about learning and success. We're talking about formative and summative assessment. Now, I know the word assessment can sound a bit dry, but understanding the difference between these two concepts is absolutely crucial for any learning process. So instead of getting bogged down in dense academic theory, we're going to head straight into the kitchen. We're using a wonderfully simple culinary metaphor to make perfect sense of how we actually measure learning and growth.
Okay, let's dive into this with section 1, the soup metaphor. It's a culinary concept that perfectly explains how assessment works. Consider this brilliant little quote from assessment researcher Robert Stake. When the cook tastes the soup, that's formative. When the guests taste the soup, that's summative. It's a short, kind of humorous thought, right? But man, it carries a massive idea. Just think about the underlying mechanics here for a second. The exact same spoonful of soup gives you entirely different information depending entirely on when you taste it. If you're the cook and you taste the soup while it's still simmering on the stove, well, you have the power to fix it. You can add a pinch of salt, a dash of pepper, maybe let it reduce a bit longer. But when that soup is finally poured into a bowl and served to the guests in the dining room, the cooking process is completely over. The guests are simply judging the final product. And that is the profound difference between actively shaping an outcome while there is still time and simply delivering a final judgment.
Which brings us to section 2, a quiet revolution, and the evolution of assessment.
You see, this isn't just some passing fad. It's established science. If we go way back to 1967, Michael Scriven actually coined the terms formative and summative, and he originally used them to describe entirely different roles in curriculum evaluation. Then, over the following decades, the legendary Benjamin Bloom and his colleagues borrowed these terms and did something truly revolutionary. They pointed them directly at the students themselves. Fast forward to 1998, and Paul Black and Dylan William published a landmark review called Inside the Black Box. Through this specific historical progression, the whole idea of assessment evolved in a major way. It was no longer seen as just a final verdict handed down at the end of a long semester or training module. No, it became recognized as an active, dynamic tool, something used right smack in the middle of the learning process to course correct and actually change what happens next. So the crucial point is really highlighted in section 3, backward versus forward, measuring direction. The sharp linguistic contrast here perfectly illustrates the difference between these two approaches. Summative assessment inherently looks backward. It literally sums up the learning that's already happened. Think of your final exams, end-of-unit tests, professional certifications, or, that final grade printed on a transcript. Summative measures achievement at a fixed point in time and reports it to the outside world. Formative assessment, on the flip side, looks forward. Its primary job isn't to rank or grade you, but to inform. It reveals exactly where a learner is right at this very second. It diagnoses misunderstandings early so that both the teacher and the learner can figure out the absolute best immediate next steps. Now, what's really fascinating here is the distinction about the format itself. A lot of people get tripped up. They think a multiple choice test is always summative, or a casual classroom chat is always formative. But actually, the defining feature isn't the format of the task at all. It's the use of the information. Think about it. You could take the exact same Friday morning math quiz. If the teacher just slaps a letter grade on it, records it in a gradebook, and moves on to the next chapter on Monday, well, that quiz was summative. But if the teacher looks at those exact same results, sees that, hey, everyone struggled with question number 4, and uses that information to redesign Monday's lesson to reteach that specific concept, boom, right there, that exact same quiz just became formative. It is all about how you apply the data. Because of this functional difference, a lot of researchers actually prefer a much sharper phrase. Instead of formative assessment, they call it assessment for learning. I love this because it perfectly captures the end goal, doesn't it? You're assessing specifically to aid and enhance the learning process itself. It shifts the spotlight completely away from just measuring a student's worth or ranking them against their peers, and shines it brightly on actively developing them. And there's even a powerful third layer to this, which is called assessment as learning. This is that crucial moment when students themselves start using the evidence of their own work to steer their own personal progress. They learn to self-monitor, catching their own mistakes and adjusting their strategies in real time. It's really cool stuff. All right, let's look at the hard empirical data in section 4, Inside the Black Box. Now, in the world of educational research, an effect size ranging from 0.4 to 0.7 is absolutely massive. To put this into perspective for you, an effect size simply measures the magnitude of a difference an intervention actually makes. In education, an effect size of around zero point 0.4 is generally considered the equivalent of about a whole year's worth of growth. So seeing numbers stretching all the way up to zero point 0.7, that is extraordinary. This data comes directly from Paul Black and Dylan Williams' 1998 landmark review. They dug deep into the numbers to see exactly what happens when teachers seriously strengthen their formative assessment practices. And what that numerical data represents in real human terms is just profound. An effect size of that magnitude can literally be the difference between an average student and a clearly above average one. We're not just talking about a minor statistical bump in test scores here. We are talking about a transformational leap in a student's capability, their confidence, and their overall potential. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer power of this approach. Let's look at the key findings from inside the black box. They didn't just guess. They synthesized roughly 250 separate studies. And they discovered that formative assessment produced some of the absolute largest learning gains ever recorded in the research literature. It proved to be a more powerful lever for raising standards than almost any massive structural reform a school could even attempt. And, perhaps most importantly, it's one of the very few strategies proven to actually narrow achievement gaps between students rather than widening them. By providing immediate course correction, students aren't just left to compound their errors or fall behind for weeks at a time. That daily, minute-by-minute feedback loop ensures everyone stays on track, preventing small misunderstandings from turning into massive learning deficits. The results are, frankly, staggering. So, let's bring it all back to the kitchen for our final section, serving a better meal. Now, it's really important to understand that formative and summative assessments are not enemies. They aren't two competing species of tests where one is the good guy and the other is evil. They're simply two different uses of evidence, and honestly, a well-designed system absolutely needs both. Eventually, we really do need the guest to taste the soup. We need fair reporting, we need accountability, and we need certification so we know for sure that a doctor actually knows medicine, an engineer understands physics, or a pilot knows how to fly a plane safely. Summative assessment is very real, legitimate, and entirely necessary for a functioning society. But here is the catch, and really the core message of our deep dive today. If the cook never tastes the soup along the way, the meal is already decided before anyone even pulls out a chair to sit down. The absolute tragedy in so many classrooms, lecture halls, and corporate training environments today is that almost all of the tasting happens at the table. We wait until that high-stakes final exam to see if anyone actually learned anything. And by then, it's way too late to add the salt. The opportunity for growth has completely passed, replaced entirely by an unchangeable judgment. So before you reach for another end-of-term test, or before you judge a project only when it's totally finished, I want you to ask yourself this modest but entirely transformative question. What evidence am I gathering while there is still time to act on it? Making that single shift, from merely judging learning to actively feeding it, well, that's the entire point of formative assessment. Remember, the cook who tastes early and tastes often almost always serves the better soup. Keep learning, everyone, and I'll see you in the next explainer.